What are some psychology experiments with interesting results? Hedonic adaptation. Put simply, a person who had just won the lottery and another person who had just been paralyzed took a survey to measure their life contentment. Obviously, it was high and low, respectively. However, they both took the same survey a year later and both scored similarly. The point being that regardless what happens to you in life, good or bad, you will always adapt and spend most of your life feeling neutral. Split brain studies. One example. By providing differing information to each hemisphere of the brain in split brain individuals, those with a severed corpus callosum, meaning there's no communication between the two hemispheres, they found that people would actually physically grab their own hand with their other hand if they saw it making a mistake. Basically, each side of the brain controls one side of your body, and in split brain people you can actually make both sides display a disagreement with the other, which is insane if you think about it. If you train a rat to press a lever for cocaine, and then put it in a box with only that lever, it will press that lever as much as you'll allow it. The rat will stop eating and drinking and just do cocaine. If you train a rat to press a lever for cocaine, and then put it in an enriched environment, e.g., other rats to play with, toys, place to explore, where it could still press the lever for cocaine, it may press the lever occasionally, but not as frequently as its counterpart in the dull environment. These findings were a big deal in the behaviorism world because they put a lot of previous results into context and helped explain the link between poverty and drug use. Also, thank you for the silver kind stranger. Research on learned helplessness is fascinating. Researchers would put dogs into shuttle boxes, long cage-like structures that the dog could move around in, and would shock the dog through the floor on one side of the box. The dog, at first, could easily escape the shock by moving to the other side of the box. Eventually, the researcher adds a wall so the dog can't escape the shocks. It just sits there, being shocked without escape. Through this, the dog learns helplessness over repeated trials and extended periods of time. Even when the wall is taken down, the dog won't walk to the other side and avoid the shocks anymore. It has become so used to the pain that it doesn't even try to escape when escape would be easy. This research has been used to explain certain aspects of human behavior, especially related to repeated experiences of abuse, addiction, and poverty. It takes a long time to get somebody out of this mindset, and is possibly one of the reasons why people get stuck in terrible situations. I don't know the name of it, but apparently two people become closer if they survive through something together. Not even actual surviving death scenarios, but anything that has you on your toes and heart racing, like a roller coaster. The car crash experiment. It demonstrated that the way investigators word a question has an immediate effect on the subject's memory of an event. It was part of a suite of studies by Elizabeth Loftus, with various other co-researchers, that began to call into question the veracity of eyewitness accounts. And #X200B. The influence of the color red in sports. Judges were shown a video of a taekwondo match and awarded more points to the red competitor versus the blue competitor. When the colors were digitally reversed, judges awarded more points to the other, now red, competitor. For my psychology degree dissertation, I presented photos of men to be rated on a scale of friendly, 0, to threatening, 10. Men received a higher threat score if I photoshopped their t-shirt to be red, smiley face. Aaron and Dutton, 1974. Misattribution of arousal. Men who had just walked across bridge, either steady or unsteady, were approached by a female psychology student, posing to do a project on the effects of exposure to scenic attractions on creative expression. The men had to complete a questionnaire and write a short dramatic story about a picture she provided, and she gave them her phone number if they had more questions. Men who walked across the shaky bridge were more likely to call her up because they misattributed the arousal from the bridge to the woman. TLDR. Watch a horror movie on the first date. If you stare into a dimly lit, i.e. candlelit, mirror for 10+ minutes, you start to see hallucinations. What individuals see tends to vary, but they've used this as a test to simulate schizophrenia before, because some see monsters / deformities / general weird shit. I did a variation of it for a mate at uni and completely wimped out of it. After my face started not looking like my face anymore, I had a complete dissociation. I stopped looking and just waited out the time. Edit 2. This is a weird visual trick that your brain can play on you, but the effects can seem super real, so maybe don't do this if you are susceptible to hallucinations / are a wimp with this kind of shit like me. Edit 3. Thanks for the gold. And yes, it is basically a scientific Bloody Mary. It's not that psychopaths lack empathy, but rather, they have the manual settings. A specific region of the brain lights up when people experience empathy. For most people, it's an automatic, subconscious response. But in a study where they showed emotional videos to psychopaths and none while scanning their brains, psychopaths would only light that region of the brain when specifically asked to feel for the character, while the control participants would light up automatically. Reconsolidation. When you retrieve a memory from your long-term memory, it is susceptible to being manipulated. This can lead to memories being totally changed from the source. This is why eyewitness accounts cannot be fully seen as true. This knowledge is also being used to help people with PTSD by changing the negative memories they have of their particular trauma. If people have the upper hand, they will put others down to keep it. An experiment told a class of kids that having blue eyes meant you were smarter, achieved more, etc. All of a sudden, kids with blue eyes formed their own groups. Things like bullying and exclusion of other eye colors started too. They repeated the experiment with different eye colors in different classes, all with the same results. The phantom limb experiment is pretty fascinating. Basically, you can be tricked into feeling something that's not there. Here's an article about the experiment. Well, the salmon study. To test a behavioral procedure in an MRI machine, the experimenters got a dead salmon to use as a dummy, as it had to be something organic. They were in shock when they discovered that the fMRI was recording increased bold response, blood oxygen level dependent, in the dead salmon when running their experiment, suggesting this dead salmon's brain was somehow reacting to the experiment. This led to the findings that fMRI is not perfect, and we should expect a certain level of false positives, highlighting the importance of retests and tighter statistical analyses. The rule tends to be the less ethical the experiment is, the more interesting. The Little Albert experiment. A psychologist conditioned a baby into being scared of white, fluffy things. I also like this one very, very much. Scientists replicated 100 recent psychology experiments. More than half of them failed. I loved learning about infant development. My favorite was probably the development of depth perception, or perhaps the fear of heights. We're not born with it, but if I recall correctly, we develop it within the first year or so. Scientists created a raised square platform. Half of the floor was wood, and the other glass. The actual surface of the floor, 1 meter or so below, was white with red polka dots. At varying intervals of age, the babies would be brought in and placed on the wood end and encouraged to crawl to their moms who were standing at the glass end of the platform. In early infancy, baby crawls over there without giving a shit. At some point, though, they stop at the point where the wood meets the glass, or plexiglass maybe, showing that they recognize the difference in height and the fear of falling. Babies' brains are pretty fucking cool. Not entirely sure it fits into the category, but the Rosenhan experiment. 13 people feigned mental illnesses to get into mental hospitals, and all were admitted with different diagnoses. They then assumed their normal personalities, but to be released, they all had to admit that they were mentally ill. There was a second part where a hospital challenged Rosenhan to send multiple fake patients to the hospital, and they would rate their patients on a scale of whether they think they were faking. They identified many possible fakers, but Rosenhan in fact hadn't sent anyone. Subjects were tested for introvert versus extrovert personality types. Prediction was that when placed in a sensory deprivation chamber, the introverts would be able to handle it easily, while the extroverts would not. Exactly the reverse was found. Introverts became agitated quickly and performed all manners of self-stimulation. Extroverts quickly went to sleep. What the finding showed was that it's introverts who are the sensation seekers, needing stimulation from the outside world. Extroverts create their own internal sensation and project that out to the world. Dunning-Kruger effect is one of my favorites. Basically, people with less expertise in a field will overestimate their abilities in a given field because they don't know enough to see the limits of their expertise. At the same time, experts tend to underestimate their abilities because they know too well what they don't know. The phenomenon has, among other factors, been linked to anti-vaxxers who overestimate their expertise, not seeing what they don't know, with dire consequences. I just recently heard of blindsidedness during one of my cognitive psychology classes. Basically, the area of the brain that processes what our eyes see is located at the back of the head, just where your skull starts to get smaller, towards your neck. Because of this, if you hit your head back there quite often, everything will go black for a moment before sight returns again. Sometimes, though, following severe trauma to this area of the brain, like after falling off a ladder onto a curb or something, a person is never able to see again. For a long time, it was assumed that the eyes were somehow incapable of seeing following the trauma, and that was why people were blind. However, it's been shown that it is just the processing of the images that is damaged. In other words, your eyes are still working away, viewing images, but your brain is unable to process the images, so you can't see them. Some experiments looking into this have found that people with damage to this area can still navigate around things in front of them without realizing they're doing it. So if you told someone with this damage to walk down a corridor, and you placed obstacles in their way, they wouldn't be able to see the obstacles, but they could avoid bumping into them because their eyes are still able to view them and send signals to other areas of the brain to avoid knocking things. This is known as blindsidedness. Blew my little mind, TBH. Just the general psychological phenomenon of loss aversion. In cognitive psychology and decision theory, loss aversion refers to people's tendency to prefer avoiding losses to acquiring equivalent gains. It is better to not lose $5 than to find $5. It's basically why insurance companies exist. White rats and black rats were raised separately, without seeing each other. When a black rat was placed in the white rat's cage, the other rats ostracized him. When white and black rats are raised together and a new black rat is placed in a cage, the white rats accept him. So basically, rats are racist, unless raised to accept differences. I'm a huge fan of Milgram's small world experiment. It is more sociology than psychology, but I still think it is really cool. Milgram sends out 160 letters containing the name and address of a stockbroker in Boston to people in Omaha, Nebraska. They had to send it to someone they thought would get the letter closer, but they couldn't mail it directly to the stockbroker. Interestingly, most people that sent on the letter sent it on to the same group of people on the 5th degree. It only took 6 people, hence the 6 degrees of separation, to arrive on average. It shows how interconnected our world is, even before the internet, which is happy to think about. The 3 Christs of Ypsilanti. Psychologist forces 3 people who believe that they are Jesus Christ to live together. It does not go well. The psychologist, Milton Rokeach, had heard of a case where 2 women who believed that they were Mary, Mother of Christ, were forced to live together, and one of them broke free from their delusion. So he figured, 3 Christs, what would happen? They were angry at each other, often had physical fights. They eventually started getting along by avoiding the topic. He would ask them about the others, and each would say that the others were crazy. That they, of course, were the real Jesus.
No cures.
Some unethical stuff. Interesting though. Hubel and Wiesel inserted an electrode into the brain of a cat and took a single-cell recording of a cell in its visual cortex. By somewhat of an accident, they found that the neuron only fired when an object had one specific orientation. This was pretty much the discovery of center/surround on-off visual processing cells in the V1 visual cortex. Cool stuff. The elevator groupthink study, very amusing and sad at the same time. The experiment involved several actors entering an elevator with an oblivious participant. They then began to perform a series of odd behaviors, such as they all stood facing the rear of the elevator. Inevitably, everyone else who got on ended up also facing the rear, so as not to stand out from the rest. The study demonstrates how easily people succumb to group pressure to behave in a certain way. And #X200B. The case study done of Jeannie. She was a severely neglected child that never learned to speak. It became apparent that it is not possible to learn a first language as an adolescent. Not quite psychology, but it very cool. Normally, if you try to mix blue light with yellow light, red and green, it turns out as white light. A scientist conducted an experiment where they would shine blue light in one eye of someone and yellow light in the other. The majority said that they just saw the light separately, but some said that they saw a new color that they couldn't even describe. This also works with cyan and red and magenta and green. Not so much a psychology experiment, but a finding by retail researchers that if a woman is touched below the waist within the first 10 minutes of entering a store, she will leave immediately. That's why retailers who are onto this finding space their displays wide apart at the front of a store, to minimize bumping. Then they pack the merchandise tight in the back, because shoppers who've made their way back there have already been in the store 10 minutes. Wish I had a link for this. It was cited in a magazine article a decade ago. Diet and behavior in children. TLDR, sugar and sweets don't make kids hyper. I love this one because it's so counterintuitive and every parent loves to tell you how their kid definitely does. Researchers took a bunch of parents and their kids and split them into 2 groups, those who get healthy fruit and those who get sugary sweets. The kids were separated from their parents for a moment and given the fruit or the sweets. A few minutes later, the parents were brought back in and either told the truth about what they'd been given or lied to and told the opposite. The parents and kids were left by themselves with an assortment of toys, and the parents were asked to rate their kids' behavior. What they found is that irrespective of what they were actually given to eat, parents who were told their kids had sugary sweets reported worse behavior than those who were told they had fruit. Again, irrespective of what they actually had. / given fruit, given sweets. : Told the kids had fruit, kids behaved, kids behaved. Told the kids had sweets, kids misbehaved, kids misbehaved. Not told what they'd had, kids behaved, kids behaved. The interesting thing is that when you actually looked at the kids' behavior, they really were misbehaving. Generally being more inclined to screech, throw toys around, or ignore instructions. Turns out it's actually the parents' behavior that determines how the kids act. The same study has also been done with sugary drinks vs water. Same result. The monster experiment. Although it is horrible how they left the children with mental health issues at the end, this experiment gave very good insight to how to parent a child. On this experiment, they took groups of orphan children and separated them into 3 groups. One was the control, the second were told they has a lips and were doing bad, and the third was told that their speech was perfect. As the experiment went on, Group 2 began developing lisps after being berated constantly. They became shy and reserved. They were scared to speak because they didn't want to get in trouble because of their poor speaking skills. Group 3, however, had the opposite happen. They talked better, they were more willing to improve. They were encouraged to keep speaking and told that their speech was amazing and perfect. By the end of the experiment, they had one group with no change, one group with now mentally ill children with a speech impediment, and one group with great speaking skills. It truly shows that encouraging children is the way to go and that verbal abuse can be just as, if not more, harmful as physical abuse. The 5 monkeys experiment. An experimenter puts 5 monkeys in a large cage. High up at the top of the cage, well beyond the reach of the monkeys, is a bunch of bananas. Underneath the bananas is a ladder. The monkeys immediately spot the bananas, and one begins to climb the ladder. As he does, however, the experimenter sprays him with a stream of cold water. Then, he proceeds to spray each of the other monkeys. The monkey on the ladder scrambles off, and all 5 sit for a time on the floor, wet, cold, and bewildered. Soon, though, the temptation of the bananas is too great, and another monkey begins to climb the ladder. Again, the experimenter sprays the ambitious monkey with cold water, and all the other monkeys as well. When a third monkey tries to climb the ladder, the other monkeys, wanting to avoid the cold spray, pull him off the ladder and beat him. Now 1 monkey is removed and a new monkey is introduced to the cage. Spotting the bananas, he naively begins to climb the ladder. The other monkeys pull him off and beat him. Here's where it gets interesting. The experimenter removes a second one of the original monkeys from the cage and replaces him with a new monkey. Again, the new monkey begins to climb the ladder and, again, the other monkeys pull him off and beat him, including the monkey who had never been sprayed. The Selective Laziness of Reasoning is an article I found and then partially replicated in my research methods class during my undergraduate. It's so great with a very interesting method and results that make you think about discussions and arguments a lot. Basically, the researchers presented participants with different syllogisms, logic puzzles like all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, so Socrates is moral, etc. And they asked them to provide their answers and also their reasoning for the answers. Later on, the participants were asked to return and they presented some of their old answers, but the answers were reversed to be exactly what they had written down previously. But if their own argument from prior was presented as someone else's, they would disagree with it. The lesson: we critically evaluate other people's arguments with a lot more focused lens, and we afford ourselves less loopholes to jump through to validate/substantiate our own claims. The Bobo Dolls experiment revealed the impact of modeling violence on children's behaviors. Recent small sample size experiment in toddlers, 18mo, I think, investigating the link between fine plus gross motor skills and time spent on a computer tablet. Results showed no difference in gross motor skills between children who had spent lots of time on a tablet and children who had spent no time at all on one. Fine motor skills and understanding the task was largely increased in those who had spent time on tablets. There is an optical variable called tau, expressed as image size divided by image expansion rate, and it has been shown to be used to perceive time to contact of an approaching object. Even diving birds have been shown to use it. The most interesting part is that the tau quantity is perceived as a whole, directly, and not arrived at by any sort of implicit calculations. Also, its time derivative, called tau, is used to control deceleration toward an object, e.g. braking in a car. Physical activity, in the form of aerobic activity, does a better job of maintaining cognitive ability in aging than any brain training game or cognitively stimulating activities. Casual video games can reduce stress, like Candy Crush, Sushi Cat. Exposure to nature reduces stress and improves cognitive ability. A lot of good material for that regard in thinking, fast and slow. Our psych class repeated an experiment where half the class held a pencil in between their teeth and the other half balanced on their top lips. We then rated how funny we thought a comic strip was. Turns out using face muscles associated with smiling, pencil between teeth, made the comic strip subjectively funnier than those associated with frowning, pencil balanced on top lips. Choosing to smile or frown can change how you feel and perceive life. Disappointed this isn't in the top comments. Will probably get buried. Michael of Vsauce fame teamed up with a group of PhD candidates in the psychology department of McGill for his show Minefield. They recruited 3 kids with different disorders: eczema with skin-picking disorder, ADHD, and chronic migraines after a concussion. The kids were each told they were going to be the first to receive a new experimental treatment for their condition, which consisted of putting them into a fake, non-functional MRI machine. Before doing so, they told them that the machine had the power to help them heal their brain. Michael even got a bunch of famous YouTubers to make fake videos discussing the new technology to make the kids believe it. While they were in the machine, the researchers, dressed as doctors, asked the kids if they were feeling the effects of the machine and that they believed it was working. They never lied to the kids, they just told them it would give them the power to heal themselves. All 3 of the kids had markedly improved symptoms several weeks later. The girl with eczema pretty much entirely stopped picking her skin to the point that she felt comfortable wearing short-sleeve shirts for the first time. The mother of the kid with ADHD reported that he was much more calm and not as hyperactive. The kid with chronic migraines went from having something like 5 to 10 debilitating migraines per day to absolute 0, as shown by the chart his mom kept to track them. Placebos are a hell of a drug. A bunch of chimpanzees got trained that they get coins which they could redeem for snacks. Very quickly the guys did spend their coins on the female chimpanzees to fuck them, and the girls bought snacks for it. Quite insane, faced with tears of joy. This experiment is pretty dark but interesting. In the United States, 1944, an experiment was conducted on 40 newborn infants to determine whether individuals could thrive alone on basic physiological needs without affection. 20 newborn infants were housed in a special facility where they had caregivers who would go in to feed them, bathe them, and change their diapers, but they would do nothing else. The caregivers had been instructed not to look at or touch the babies more than what was necessary, never communicating with them. All their physical needs were attended to scrupulously, and the environment was kept sterile, none of the babies becoming ill. The experiment was halted after 4 months, by which time, at least half of the babies had died at that point. At least 2 more died, even after being rescued and brought into a more natural familial environment. There was no physiological cause for the babies' deaths. They were all physically very healthy. Before each baby died, there was a period where they would stop verbalizing and trying to engage with their caregivers, generally stop moving, nor cry, or even change expression. Death would follow shortly. The babies who had given up before being rescued died in the same manner, even though they had been removed from the experimental conditions. I am fascinated by the psychology of the placebo effect. Yellow 5 for clarity. A person is given a benign substance with no known health benefits, but are told that it will treat/cure/ etc. their condition. And it does. While this is often observed in drug tests where half of the test subjects receive a new drug and half receive a sugar pill, there has been some research that Dr. Andrew Wells cites that shows the placebo effect can be capitalized on and used to help people heal. Essentially, your brain can do what many drugs do if you believe that it can. Research into where morality comes from. They asked people taboo questions like, a brother and sister are alone in a cabin in the woods one night. They are both over 18 and decide to make love once, as they think it will strengthen their relationship. The sister is on birth control, and the brother wears a condom just to be safe. Is this act wrong? Or another question was, a woman is cleaning her house and has no rags, so she finds an old American flag, tears it up, and uses it to clean her house. Is this act wrong? They created stories like this to give an initial reaction of disgust. They would then ask the participants to explain their answers. Most people couldn't give a good answer, only saying it feels wrong. They then went further, and the interviewer would try their best to change the participant's mind, saying things like, well, no one saw, no one got hurt, etc., but participants wouldn't change their original response. The conclusion was that people make intuitive, emotional, split-second decisions all the time, and the reasoning, logical portion of the brain tries its best to explain the decision, but cannot change the initial decision. See The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. While short-lived, chewing gum before a test can help you perform better. And #X200B. Gum. Never test without it. Source. We make snap decisions 7 seconds before we think we do. The decision is made by other parts of your brain, leaving your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain you use to think, to rationalize the decision. So you don't decide anything based on rational thought. You just try to explain your decision after it has been made. There was this kid who was asked a question about what he wanted to become when he is older. He replied, he wanted to become a painter. That answer was provided by the left hemisphere of the brain, which is fundamental when you are talking, but the right hemisphere wanted to say something else, although it can't control vocal language. What it could do is spell words with pieces of Scrabble. So the researchers put a piece of paper with the same question written on it and showed it to the left side of the kid's vision, controlled by the right hemisphere that can't talk. What happened was that his hand started moving to the Scrabble pieces, and he spelled racing cars, which is a completely different answer than the previous one. This shows that we are not individuals since both parts of the brain showed their own answer. I hope y'all understood. Source. Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari. Hurricanes with female names are deadlier than those with male names. A paper published in PNAS by Young et al., 2014, used 6 decades of death rates from U.S. hurricanes and lab experiments and found that feminine-named hurricanes cause significantly more deaths than do masculine-named hurricanes. This is because hurricane names lead to gender-based expectations about intensity and severity, which in turn guides people's intentions to take protective action. A stunning finding on the effects of gender stereotypes. The Little Albert study is my favorite WTF psych study. Basically, little kid named Albert likes bunnies. Loves bunnies. Scientists want to see if they can train fear. So they bang a loud gong every time a bunny gets close to Albert, startling him. Albert becomes traumatized to the sight of bunnies. Effect lasts into adulthood. They teach this study as an example of ethical no-nos. Space rats. You probably know that if you drop a cat upside down, that they'll right themselves and land on their feet. Rats have this reflex too. Even baby rats have this reflex, however slower, which is tested by dropping them upside down in a tank of water. The baby rats will flip themselves upright as they float down through the water, before they are scooped out and dried off. It was assumed that all reflexes are innately coded for in their genes. A group of researchers from the developmental psychobiology field didn't believe in this idea of innate reflexes. They believe that reflexes are learned through non-obvious experience. The researchers took a newly pregnant rat and sent her into space. The rat gestated the babies in space and was brought back to Earth just before giving birth. The baby rats were born on Earth in the lab. When the baby space rats were tested for the righting reflex, they didn't show it. They just floated through the water like they didn't know which way was down. Because the baby rats didn't have experience with gravity in utero, they didn't learn about gravity and didn't develop the innate reflex. Therefore, other reflexes may be just as experience-driven as this one. MKUltra is barbaric yet very interesting. You'd be amazed at some of the survivor testimonies. The levels of programming and abuse put the human psyche in places we can't imagine. Here's a two-fair for you. So way back in the day, researchers examined the brains of cab drivers in London versus regular people via brain scanning. MRI, I believe, but I can't recall. They found that the cab drivers had cognitive advantages over regular people and also had a larger hippocampus, the area of the brain primarily involved in memory storage and recall. Just last year, researchers investigated the effects of video games on cognitive decline. They had older people either play Mario 64/Mario Galaxy, took virtual piano lessons, or they did nothing. This lasted 6 months. The researchers measured brain size before and after the experiment began. They also gave the participants a test on their short-term memory and cognitive functioning before and after the experiment as well. And #X200B. And #X200B. Mario Group. Increased gray matter in the hippocampus and cerebellum. Improved short-term memory and cognitive functioning. Piano Group. Increased gray matter in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and cerebellum. No change in cognitive functioning. Control. No significant change. The authors believed that it was because the participants had to learn and navigate through a virtual world in order to beat the game that they wound up developing their short-term memory. The results were similar to those found in cab driver research. Mario doesn't provide players with an in-game map the way Call of Duty does, so they have to develop an internal cognitive map of the virtual world in order to get around it. Now, it's important to remember that the changes in cognitive functioning were very small to the extent that I would argue that they aren't actually meaningful, that the sample size in this experiment were very small, which could have skewed the results, and that it was very recent and still needs to be replicated. But the results to me are fascinating in that they suggest that certain video games may provide certain benefits to older people. I really want to see what happens if they had participants play the games for longer than 6 months, since realistically, gamers won't just play games for a 6-month period, they play for years. Another interesting experiment is the Loftus experiments of fake memories and the power of suggestion. It's basically about implanting memories of events that have never taken place or alter the subject's detailed memory of the event. You can quite easily test this IRL. Find a busy picture of a village, preferably cartoon and vividly colored. Allow a test subject to inspect the picture for 20 to 30 seconds and let them know that you'll be asking questions. Turn the picture face down and ask 2 to 3 questions about the contents of the picture. Preferably easy to answer questions. Was there an X in the picture? Or did Y happen? Also mix in a fake question there. For instance, the picture may have had a skyline but no sun. If you ask the test subject whether the sun was yellow or orange, chances are that they will create a memory of a sun being visible in the picture and tell you a color. The Loftus experiment has been used to disqualify young children from giving testimonials in judicial proceedings, and follow-up experiments have included implanted memories of fake balloon rides and parents losing the subject in a mall as a toddler. It's quite fascinating. In his book on morality, I believe, Sam Harris cites an experiment done with patients who had a corpus calloscotomy, a surgical treatment where the communicating nerves of the 2 hemispheres of the brain are cut in order to sever epileptic seizures. A sheet is placed between the eyes of a patient, and on the side that isn't conscious there will be a text reading, "Stand up and leave the room." The patient proceeds to stand up and walk away, at which point she is asked why they are leaving. The patient will always have an excuse or explanation ready, like they are cold and getting a sweater, or they are thirsty and going to get a drink. The real reason is, of course, that they were told. But since they don't know that, they will fabricate a story and seemingly even believe it themselves. This is a significant blow to the sense of free will and self-autonomy. Why did I choose this line of career? Why did I buy this dog? Why did I name my child this name? We think we know why we behave the way we do, but so did those patients. The pratfall effect. In essence, if you are considered highly competent, you become more likable after a small mistake. The classic example, and what happened in the initial experiment, involved people spilling coffee during an interview to be a contestant on a show. If someone demonstrated themselves to be intelligent and competent, they became more likable after spilling coffee on themselves. Anyone previously seen as average or less than ideal actually suffered from the blunder. One of my favorites is the rather prosaically named a not-be error. It works with babies who have recently learned that they can manipulate things around them using their hands, around 6 to 10 months. It goes like this. You sit a baby on your lap, with a small toy and 2 large clear, see-through, glasses on the table in front of you. With the baby's help, i.e. with them holding the toy and you guiding their hand, You put the toy under one of the two glasses. Then, with the baby watching, you take the toy from under the glass and move it to under the second glass. Then you wait for the baby to reach for the toy. And they reach for the first, empty glass, even though the toy is clearly visible under the second glass. The reason is that the baby develops a hugely egocentric view of the world for a while. All she knows for sure is that she can move stuff with her hands, and that's the way that the world works. Sure, she saw you move the toy, but she didn't do it, so it didn't happen. The toy must be where she left it. I tried this on my kids when they were the right age, and it worked. The Robber's Cave Experiment. Basically, they took 24 boys into the woods and split them up into groups of 12. Each group was told to make a flag and a name. They were put through team-building exercises and went through the predicted storming, norming, conforming phases. When put in competition with the others, rivalries grew, which were demonstrated when the boys were forced to eat together and not segregate themselves. Later on, the researchers cut off the water supply to the camp and forced the two tribes to work together to fix it. They ended up going through the same storming, norming, conforming process and put aside their rivalries, eventually becoming one homogeneous tribe, even going as far as all talking as one group on the bus home. Don't know if you guys would care for it, but there are tons of experiments concerning babies and how they perceive the world. One interesting one that stuck with me was when one research team found out that babies recognize consonants of almost every language known to man. But as they grow up, they lose this ability. This supports Chomsky's concept of a language center in our brains. But there are tons of other researches disapproving it too.